Today we're going to look at every machine in my shop. I'll tell you what I like, what I don't like, and if I would buy it again. Welcome back to Cloud42, I'm James. I put up a poll on Patreon last week and I asked my excellent patrons to vote on what videos they would like to see. And the hands down winner was to go through all of the machines in my shop and talk about whether I would buy them again. It wasn't even close, so that's what we're going to do today. Though when I actually started going through my shop and making a list, I realized I've got a lot of equipment in this small space and it's going to take a couple of videos to get through it all. Before we jump right into the machines, there are some things you probably should know about my shop. It's a little bit different maybe than the shop that you're building, so my priorities and my needs are going to be different. First thing is, this is not a job shop. I am not making parts for paying customers, so my considerations for what makes a good machine for me might be different from you if you are actually trying to be productive and make a living with this. This is a hobby, so the machines that I choose are really about having the machines that I need in order to do the kinds of work that I enjoy and the kind of things that I want to work on. My decisions are not based on whether a machine will pay for itself in terms of productivity and work done for customers, because that's just not the kind of thing that I do. The third thing is, this is in a residential garage. If you can't tell that by just looking around here, I have about 2 bays of a garage dedicated to the shop. The third bay over there is dedicated to a gym and a little bit of storage and some things that are in progress. But in general, I've only got 2 bays of a residential garage dedicated to the shop. So space efficiency is more important to me than, say, money efficiency or productivity on the tools. The fourth thing is, this is a video production studio, not just a shop. So I'm not just concerned about doing the work of a machine shop, I'm also concerned about being able to shoot video. So I've got camera mounts up here on the ceiling, I've got lots of light, I've got clear spaces. Some of that stuff is stuff you would want in a machine shop, but I will make decisions here that are really oriented more around video production than they are around shop productivity. And then the last thing is, I just want to mention everything in here is bootstrapped. So I didn't come in with a huge amount of cash and build this shop overnight. This was built up over a long period of time. I've been on YouTube for 6 years. I've been doing things in this shop for longer than that. And I generate a little bit of revenue from something and use that to buy the next tool. So everything you see here was built up gradually over time, and the shop at this point, including the YouTube channel, is largely self-supporting. Let's start out by talking about my benchtop mill here. This is a Grizzly G0704 mill that I've done quite a lot of work to. So I bought this just as the mill itself with the stand underneath it, and then I started adding on to it. I built this enclosure to go around it, and one of the first things that I did with it was convert it to CNC. So I've got stepper motors on all 3 axes, and a big stepper motor up here, especially on Z, because it's heavy. This does have a ball screw conversion. I did put ball screws in it all the way around. And I've got the CNC control box over here on the side of this tool cabinet, and then all of the tooling in the cabinet here next to it. Now the stock spindle is R8, and that's the head down there on the ground where I disembodied it and threw it when I put this high-speed spindle on it a few years ago. Now in terms of the usage of this machine, it does not get much use anymore because I have converted over and I'm doing most of my milling work on the knee mill. And then I'm also working on the Avid CNC router that hopefully one day is going to replace this. And it just so happens that I haven't had any projects that really needed CNC milling in the last few months. So this is currently unplugged because I moved it to shuffle some things around in the shop and I haven't put it back together yet. And you can see right now the table on this thing is being used for storage. Now this particular machine, it's not as rigid as I would like. As a starter machine, as a benchtop mill, this is much heavier than your average mini mill. I think this is about a 350 pound mill with the stock head on it. And for just milling in a home shop, it's been great. And I think it's the right size for hobby use. But when you have a knee mill, you start to see the rigidity problems. Now, one of the things that I haven't talked about very much on the channel is that the bed on this is actually not flat. If I grab a scale and put it across here, I don't know how well you can see that, but it rocks by a good 5 thousandths. This mill table is 5 thousandths higher in the center than it is at the front and back edges. Now, I believe the cause of that was that I milled material out from under the bottom of it to make room for the ball screw for the nut. And I think that's actually what caused it to bow. I don't think it was bowed from the factory. But I contacted Grizzly and they actually sent me a replacement table, and I actually have it here in storage. I haven't put it on yet because it just turns out that if I bolt a vise down to this, it comes up level and I can use the mill. So I haven't bothered putting the new table on because the new table actually requires some machining as well. So let's talk about the spindle. I do get a lot of questions about this spindle and whether this CNC Depot FM30F is a good spindle. And the answer is it depends what you want to do. This thing is meant to go fast. Now this is the F version, which is a 4-pole motor, so this thing is designed to run up to, I think, 12,000 RPM. I generally run it up to around 10,000. And if you're running small tools in aluminum, like 1/4 inch or 6mm tools in aluminum, carbide, it works great. That is its sweet spot. Now, if you wanted to put a big drill into this and push it into steel, or you wanted to run a face mill, yeah, no, I don't think it really does that. It doesn't really have a lot of torque at low speed. It has some, you can use it, but I wouldn't be putting a face mill in this. I would be facing with a 1/2 inch carbide end mill and just going really fast. I think that's really the sweet spot. So there have been times when I put the original head back on this mill because I needed to run a big tool, but lately, if I'm doing that kind of stuff, I generally design the work to be manually machined on the knee mill, and that's the way that I go. And someday, I will have that Avid CNC router that you see over there up and running for CNC type work. So would I buy this machine again? If I were just starting out and I were looking for a benchtop mill, I absolutely would consider this. Now, Precision Matthews has some very nice mills in this class that look pretty attractive. I haven't checked the pricing on those. I think they're quite a bit more expensive. I know Quinn over at Blondie Hacks, she specializes in sort of this size of shop gear, and she's got some opinions, and I think she really likes the Precision Matthews mill that she has. I would definitely take a look at that. But if I were on a budget and I were starting cheap, and especially if I were looking for a machine as a donor for a small benchtop CNC machine, I think this would be a pretty good place to start. Just understand, it's not super refined, it doesn't have a central oiling system, you know, so this is a machine for somebody that wants to tinker with machines. This is not a machine for somebody who wants to just buy a machine and start making parts. Next up, let's talk about my lathe. This is the Grizzly G0602 lathe. This is actually the second machine tool I ever bought for this shop. So let me give a little bit of a sense of scale for this thing. This is a 10-inch swing by 22-inch bed length. So it's a 10 by 22 lathe. There are lots of machines in this category. This is not a mini lathe. This machine probably weighs 350 to 400 pounds, just the machine itself. And that is a really decent size for a hobby machine shop. In fact, I think this was the perfect lathe for me to start out as my first lathe. Now, there are other machines out there. Again, you're probably looking at Precision Matthews or, you know, other machines that use similar castings to this from other vendors elsewhere in the world. Precision Matthews has, what's their 1022? Is that what they call it? I can't remember. So this, again, I'll bring up Quinn over at Blondie Hacks. She has a machine that is similar in size to this from Precision Matthews. One of the big things about the PM machine is it has a feed on the cross slide. This does not. This only feeds longitudinally, and it only feeds with the lead screw, which means that threading and feeding are both using that same screw, and you're going to get more wear on it. So that would put this clearly in the class of, you know, like a hobby class machine as opposed to a more professional machine or an industrial machine that's going to have a separate drive shaft for feeding, and it will have, you know, different wear characteristics. Now, the one thing that I think sets this particular lathe apart from the Precision Matthews, though, is the drive system. So this has got a compound drive system where you've got 3 different settings for the main pulley, and then I don't have it on back there, but then there is a back gear or a back pulley with a cog belt that gives you 3 slower speeds. So even with this just having the induction motor and no VFD on it, the slowest speed on this with the motor running full speed is 150 RPM. And then if you put a VFD on it like I did and you can run that down slower, you get gobs of torque at slow speed. And again, mentioning Quinn, I know she's had a lot of trouble trying to run her PM lathe at very slow speeds because I don't know if it's got multiple belts, but it certainly doesn't have the back belt and the reduction. So when you're trying to run really slow, you're running the motor really slow with really high current demands for high torque. And that ends up being a big challenge, and I know, you know, it pops fuses. Now, what have I done to this machine? I guess a better question would be, what have I not done? So I did a video many years ago where I put a 3-phase motor and a VFD in it. I've got the VFD in a cabinet up here on the wall. It's still a 1 horsepower motor, but that really wakes this machine up. So I've just got a knob here on the front. I can adjust the spindle speed, and I can do it while it's running. I don't have to take the thing apart and change belts, and I'm not limited to these 6 speeds that I have here. I can run anywhere from about, I don't know, 80 RPM all the way up to maybe 2800 without really changing anything on the belt structure. Second thing I did on this machine is I added my electronic lead screw, and this is a project I've had lots of videos on the channel where you just dial in the speeds and feeds that you want, or the feeds and the threads. It uses an encoder here to keep track of the spindle movement, and then there's a servo that drives the lead screw. So instead of having change gears, you just dial in what you want on the panel. That has been a life-changing thing for this lathe, because, you know, this lathe, I spent maybe $1,200 on this thing when it was new, and that was 2014, 2016. They're at least double that today, but most of the lathes in this class come with change gears. And so you get out a bag of gears and get greasy if you want to change and cut threads, or cut a different thread, or if you want to change from threads and go back to feeding. You can't do both at the same time. So the electronic lead screw has been a big win. I also put this DRO from DRO Pros. This is the EL400 head, and I'm running magnetic scales on it. That has been great on this lathe. I've really enjoyed that. Again, I don't think I'd want to run a lathe without a DRO. I also upgraded the compound clamp on this because the compound clamp is pretty weak. I've got a video about that. And of course, normally I don't run the compound at all. I have a multi-fix tool post on a solid tool post riser. Those are all things that I would recommend. Now, would I buy this lathe again? Again, for somebody just starting out, I think either this machine or an equivalent from another manufacturer, or maybe the Precision Matthews in this size, I think is an excellent lathe to start with. I personally wouldn't start with a little mini lathe unless you're doing, like, you know, watchmaker or really, really small stuff. I think this is a good size. Now, incidentally, the travels on this are about the same size as a hard-hinge HLVH. So really, if I could have any lathe in the world in this shop, that's what it would be. It would be a hard-hinge HLVH. But look at the space it would take up. It would take up about that same bench, but then the entire bench underneath it would be gone, and I would lose all of that storage to the lathe. So that's a big trade-off for me, and that's one of the reasons why I haven't found a used HLVH and replace this thing. But I think that's what it would come down to for me. Would I get a used HLVH, or would I, you know, go with another one of these? Now keep in mind, there's like a 10x price difference between those. So I think that's what it would be for me. For hobby use, yeah, I think this is a good place to start, or the Precision Matthews equivalent or something else in this size. But after years and years, I really would like to have the hard-hinge. Next up is the big boy in the shop. This is the Precision Matthews PM-935TV knee mill. And this is the single phase I believe it's a 2 horsepower motor, and this is the continuously variable version. So it's got a V-belt drive in there that's continuously variable with the crank. You don't have to change the belts for different speeds. Bottom line, I love this machine, full stop. I would buy it again in a heartbeat, and let's talk about why. First of all, this machine is Taiwanese, it's not Chinese. If you look at Precision Matthews lineup, they have a bunch of machines that are made in China, and then they have a bunch of machines like this one that are made in Taiwan. And there is just, I actually had one of the Chinese machines in here. I had a PM-940, and I did not have a good time with that. It actually went back to Precision Matthews and was replaced by this. This thing's got Turkite on the ways, and it is just glassy smooth, and the run out on the spindle is extremely low. It's quiet, it's powerful, it's everything that I want in a knee mill. Now, this is not a large knee mill. This is a 9x35, and you can see that I have it raised up on some steel tubing. So I've raised it up about 5 inches off the floor to put the controls at a reasonable working height. I'm 6 feet tall, and I found that I was bending over a lot while using this thing. And I put some other, quality of life improvements in it. I've put power feeds on Z and on X. I didn't put it on Y, I just didn't want the front of the mill to be that busy. Maybe someday. I did add an air power drawbar. I love that. I can just run tools in and out very quickly. I really enjoy having that. And I added a 3-axis, actually a 4-axis DRO system. I've got videos about all of that. And I love having this. So I have a quill scale, and I have a scale on the knee, and by Vulcan gripping the right keys on the control panel, you can switch and use either one of those, or you can sum them together. So you can actually move the knee and the quill and maintain your Z height on the DRO, and that is really, really slick. The reason that I chose the 9x35 instead of the bigger machine is it 9x49? I don't remember exactly. But it's it's like a 49 instead of a 35-inch table. And the reason that I chose this one, there's 2 reasons. One is it's a little bit smaller and it fits into my space better, but it's also quite a bit lighter. If you go buy a used Bridgeport, you're looking at a 2,500 pound machine. This machine weighs in around 1,500. So it's quite a bit lighter, and you can see there's a ring on the top of the ram up there, and you can just put a hook through that, and you can actually lift this thing off the ground with an engine hoist. So I got this off the pallet, put it in position with an engine hoist. So if you've got an engine hoist and a pallet jack, you can very easily take delivery of a machine of this size and move it around in a residential garage without much trouble. Where a full-size Bridgeport, you're adding another 1,000 pounds of weight, that starts to get challenging. Not impossible, but it starts to get challenging. I do have a pair of vices on this machine, and these are the 6-inch vices. These are the Tagaras. These are from Shars, and yeah, they did sponsor it. They provided those vices for me to use on the channel. I love them. I also had the Kurt DX6 on here. I loved that vice. Honestly, aside from the fact that the Tagara does not come with the lock that goes in these slots on the back of the jaws like the Kurt does. It has a geometry, it just doesn't come with the lock. I think these are every bit as good. I have really enjoyed using them, and I would go out and spend money on this setup again. I'm very pleased with this mill. I enjoy using it. I absolutely would buy it again. Next up is perhaps the heaviest machine in the shop, and that is my surface grinder. I've had this about a year, and honestly, I haven't used it that much. That's not to say I don't like it, it's just I haven't had any projects to use it, and I just have not had the time to really dial this thing in and figure out, all of its idiosyncrasies. Now, this is an ACRA. Machines that look very similar to this are available. You can see very similar castings. In fact, you can see this particular model from ACRA with different castings. This, I believe, is made by SeedTech, and this is manufactured in Taiwan. So this is, again, not a Chinese machine. This is a Taiwanese machine, and it shows. Everything on this thing is just glassy smooth. It's got a 6x18 magnetic chuck. In fact, it's got a Japanese chuck on it. And this thing was ground in and aligned perfectly from the factory. It just showed up ready to grind. I did dress the chuck on it in a recent video. I'm not sure if I really made it that much better. It was easily within a tenth, just measured with an indicator. I was chasing some other issues with the grind that turned out to be the part that I was grinding. So, I mean, this thing just came right off the pallet ready to run. It was a challenge to get in here. I did hire a rigger. That was absolutely worth the money. I found a rigger that did the delivery from the machine dealer here in town to my house, brought it in, placed it in my garage for $250, and I would spend that money again in a heartbeat. Now, this is a 3-phase machine. It's got a 2 horsepower spindle, and you can see I've got an American rotary 5 horsepower rotary phase converter down there. I showed that in a previous video, setting that up and wiring it, and did some stuff with it. This is the approach I would take again. I would get a rotary phase converter again. It has been just great on this machine. I chose not to go with a VFD here because there are multiple motors. You have the spindle motor, but there's also a motor for the lubrication pump that's run off of a control transformer. And then this also has provisions for dust collection and coolant, and those circuits are built in. And so those are also 3-phase, so this very easily could have multiple 3-phase motors. So that's not really suitable for a VFD. My initial experiences with this machine are that it is just amazing. Could I have bought a used machine for less? A lot less. Yes, I could. And then I would have had to do a whole bunch of work on it to get it ready to run. And so in my particular situation, it was worth it to me to spend the money to buy this new. And because the shop and the YouTube channel generated enough revenue, that was an option for me to do. It isn't for everybody. But I really wanted a surface grinder so that I could use a surface grinder. I didn't really want a surface grinder so that I could rebuild a surface grinder. And I really didn't want to get into having to scrape and align and deal with all of that right away. And I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I could pick this up. Now, as far as surface grinders go, this is at the bottom end of what you would pay for a new one. You could easily spend $50,000 for a machine of this size, and this was just a fraction of that. So would I buy this machine again if I need a 6x18 grinder, or even if I just wanted a 6x18 grinder and I had the means to do it? I have been very pleased with this. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this. Now, again, is this something that your average hobbyist is going to be able to afford or make sense for them? No, absolutely not, because you could buy a mill and a lathe for that kind of money. Really nice ones, maybe even new ones. But if you need a manual surface grinder in this kind of size and it makes sense financially, this so far has been a very good one. I have been very pleased with it. Now, I don't have a ton of use on it. I haven't done a lot with it yet. And in fact, I'm not an expert. I'm still learning on this. So my experience with it is limited, but my experience of getting this thing out has not been frustrating at all. Like, there's been nothing about this machine that I've looked at and said, oh man, that's really disappointing. I've been very, very pleased with it. And in fact, I am already, getting tired of cranking the thing, even with the limited use that it's had. And you can see I've got the Y hand wheel off of it right now because I was measuring up the shaft for some mechanical parts. And the first parts from Send Cut Send for the conversion arrived in the mail today. So there will be more of that coming. This is my Harbor Freight 4x6-inch bandsaw. So this is a horizontal and vertical machine. You can set it up vertically, and there's a table that you can mount in here. It is not great, but it does have a table you can put in here for vertical use. I use it mostly as a horizontal saw, as a chop saw, just for cutting stock to length. And for that purpose, it works great. Now, some people get these things and the bearings are bad, the alignment is a mess, and they have to do a lot of work to get the saw ready to run. Mine cuts straight right out of the box. And when I say right out of the box, I mean right out of the box after I threw away the blade from Harbor Freight and put on a nice Starrett Intense Pro Die blade. And that has just been wonderful for me. Now I haven't used this a lot in the vertical position. I would definitely build a table for it if I were going to do that. I have used it a lot horizontally to chop off tubing and just to cut stock to size, like cut aluminum bar stock to size or steel bar stock to size before I then go put that in the lathe or the mill for further operations. For that, it's been great. Now, you can't get these for this price today, but I think I paid $125 for this thing when it was on sale and when Harbor Freight had their 25% off anything in the store kind of coupons many years ago. They're not that cheap anymore, but you can get these for $200 to $250, and I think at that price point, this is still a good buy. The thing you have to think about is whether 4x6 is going to be a limitation for you or whether you're going to want to use this thing vertically. The other approach that a lot of hobbyists take in this kind of space is to go with a portaband. And again, I'll reference Quinn over at Blondie Hacks just because she's got so much experience with this kind of hobby-sized gear. She took a portaband, built a table and a bracket for it, and has it mounted on the wall and just uses it as a vertical bandsaw for small stuff mounted on a wall, so like a post saw. And it looks like it's working great for her. I would seriously consider that option, especially if I was going to do mostly model engineering and small stuff, just because it takes up so much less space. As long as we're talking about other YouTubers, Stefan Gotteswinter also took a saw very similar to this, ditched the stand, put it in vertical only mode, put on a VFD and a big motor, and then he's got that mounted on the wall as a vertical saw, and then recently showed a roll-in table that he built for it. That looks like a fantastic mod that I might want to do someday. That would make it harder to use for cutting off long stock. If you had a 20-foot bar, you could throw it in here with support under the far end and cut it off. You'd have a hard time doing that with a roll-in table on a wall-mounted vertical configuration. So I think for me, starting over, it would be between this and probably a portaband with a table setup. I think I'd probably still go for this. I do have an Evolution cold saw. We can talk about that. I probably would not go for the Evolution saw over this. I probably would go for this, and we can talk about that later when we talk about that Evolution saw. Oh hey, the next thing on my list is the Evolution cold saw, and this is where it lives, down here underneath the welding table. Now if you haven't seen one of these, you've probably seen an abrasive hot saw. This is the same concept. This has a 14 or 15 inch blade. I have one that's specific for aluminum and I have one that's specific for steel. And this thing will slice through, a 3-inch round of solid steel. It's probably better suited for things like tubing. I think these saws are really marketed towards fabricators who are going to need to slice off tubing in all kinds of lengths for building roll cages or any other kind of fabrication. And for that, I think it's fine. Honestly, I don't like this. And the reasons I don't like it are twofold. First, it is really, really, really loud. I mean, this thing is a 14 or 15 inch circular saw. It's running about 1400 RPM, and it just screams. Hearing protection is an absolute must. So as a quality of life consideration, you don't want one of these in your shop unless you really, really need it. The second thing is they are just incredibly messy. They throw these little curled chips and they throw them everywhere. There is no containing them. I did a video where I tried to make a vacuum adapter for it and failed utterly. I mean, I didn't fail completely. It caught some of this stuff, but not enough that I could really run this thing without having to sweep up the entire shop when I was done. So if you're a fabricator and you just want to slice through stuff fast, these things are great. If you have the space and you have the space that can be cleaned easily and can contain the chips, and if you don't mind the need for hearing protection. But if you just got a little home hobby shop, man, that bandsaw is quiet, it's slower, and you can't just flip it around real quickly to 45 degrees for a miter cut like you can with this thing. But it's quiet. I can just flip it on and let it feed and let it cut while I work on something else, whereas this thing, while it's fast, it is super, super, super loud. Now there are cold saws that run at slow speed. Generally they're up on a pedestal, they're variable speed, and they're super quiet and they run nice and slow, like 60 RPM or 100 or 200 RPM, not 1400, and they generally run with flood coolant. I would love to have one of those, but they take up a lot of space because it's a standing machine tool, not just something like a miter saw that I can throw under the welding table like this. So I'm conflicted. I probably would not buy this again unless I had a fab shop, which is primarily not what I do here. I would probably stick with the bandsaw and ditch this, or I would replace both this and the bandsaw with a pedestal mounted slow cold saw with flood coolant. Back here in the corner is my poor neglected drill press. This is a Jet. This is the JDP17MF. This is not really a metalworking drill press. This is a woodworking drill press, and it's something that I bought when I had a woodworking shop in here. When I sold all of my woodworking tools and sent them to a better home, I kept the drill press because I thought, well, I can definitely continue to use this for metalworking, and there should be lots of things that I can do with it. There are a few things that make this machine not really optimal for that. The most important is just the speeds. This is a variable belt drive, and you can pop the cover there, and there's some pulleys up there and you can change the belts. It doesn't really run slow enough for metalworking. You're not going to put a 3/4 inch drill in this thing and run it into solid steel. This is really meant to run up to 3000 RPM, pushing big bits into wood. And if you're into mutilating dead tree carcasses, this might be a decent drill press. It's not really great for metalworking. So my plan had been to retrofit this with a 1 horsepower 3-phase motor and a VFD. And in fact, I did a video probably a couple of years ago now, making this replacement nose piece to hold the VFD controls. And I'm still in the middle of that project. I do have the motor that will fit on this. I do have the VFD. I have the electrical box. I have all the cables. I have all of the safety switches. And I have the control panel there made. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. I think if and when I finish this, the primary use will be for tapping. I'll have this set up. I might put a tapping head in it. I've thought about that. But my idea was to have this set up with the VFD so I could just power tap. I could just run the tap down, flip the VFD in reverse, back it back out, and use it primarily for that kind of operation. If I did a lot of model engineering, there are lots of situations where you have castings that you need to drill that really don't fit well under the mill, especially a small benchtop hobby mill. And having something like this available for drilling holes and flanges on the ends of long parts would be super handy. I don't do a lot of that. If and when I get ready to actually machine the replacement table and put it on this Grizzly G0704, I will need to drill some holes in the end of the table casting, and that will be something that could be done by turning it up right here. I could also hang it off the edge of the table on the knee mill, which honestly is probably what I would do. So this is going to sit here. If I were building a metalworking shop from scratch, I would not buy a drill press. At least I would not buy a drill press like this. I would look for a used gearhead drill press if I really wanted a drill press for metalworking, or I would get a drill press that has a VFD in it. There are some of those out there, but I would look for something that was specific for metalworking. But I probably would only really do that if I were doing a lot of fabrication, which I'm not. If I'm doing primarily machining, I'm going to use my mill instead. So I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do with this thing. Am I going to keep it, or am I going to send it on down the road? Am I going to finish it with the VFD and then send it down the road? I don't know. Stay tuned. I guess you'll have to wait and see. A couple of years ago, I added this D-bit grinder to the shop. This is like the Deckel SO, but this is a Chinese clone of it. This one obviously is sold by Shars. And while I do have some tools in the shop that were sponsored by Shars, this is something that I paid cash for. And I have used it a few times. You can see there's definitely some dust and grit on this thing, and I've cleaned it up several times just because it appears on video. When you need a D-bit grinder, nothing else will really do. I use this to make custom tools for milling, especially to make and sharpen engraving tools for CNC engraving. And like I said, when you need that, the D-bit grinder is really the right tool for this job. And I don't do it a lot, but when you need it, you need it. And I've used this to cut some custom lathe tools. I've used it to machine a precise 40-degree angle on a tool for cutting V-belt pulleys. Now that I have the surface grinder over here, that could be accomplished with a sine plate on the surface grinder. But again, where this really shines is making mill tools with a custom profile. Like if I needed a dovetail cutter with a special angle, this would be the tool to use for that. I've also used this for making shaping tools for cutting keyways, for broaching keyways on the mill or on the lathe. So I've done that a few times. Would I buy this again? I don't know. The thing about this particular machine is that right out of the box from Schar's, it's honestly not that great. The stops on the tool head, like to return it to 0 and have it come up square, they're kind of squishy. They don't have a real positive stop. It's hard to get them adjusted so that they're exactly at 90 degrees. I've played with this thing quite a bit and I'm not really happy with it. I have played with a real Deckel SO, and that is a completely different animal. If you get one used, you're going to have to clean it up, you're going to have to restore it most likely, but then you're going to have something that's really solid and really crisp. Could I take apart all of the joints on this thing and fix it up and get it to the point where this thing runs really well? Probably. Robin Renzetti did a series of videos cleaning up a machine that looks very much like this, and he put, turkite or some other kind of bedding material in for the shaft and made, custom knobs up here for moving it and adjusting it. He did some amazing stuff, and I'm sure that machine is awesome. This machine, as it sits right now, I would put in the just serviceable. If it's the only thing you could get and you really need a D-bit grinder, yeah, you could use this, but really you're going to need to take it apart and do some work to get it so that these things clamp crisply. It's kind of a casting kit, right? You're going to kind of have to work on it right out of the box or off the pallet. I don't know that I would buy this one again. I probably would look for a used Deckel SO and do a rebuild on it, or look for another brand. But like I said, it works if you need one. It was a little bit disappointing. Next up, let's talk about the belt grinder. Now you can't go out and buy this, so it's not a fair comparison. You can buy grinders that are similar to this. And the big question for me is, would I spend the money to have a 2x72 belt grinder in the shop? And I think the answer is yes, or I would spend the money to have one with a 6-inch wide belt. I think they're more common for machinists as opposed to like knife makers. I think the 2x72 is a pretty common size for knife making. In my case, the 2x72 just sits right here on this Husky toolbox between a bench grinder and my D-bit grinder, so this serves my needs very well of having a small machine to fit into a small shop. It also makes me happy because I built it, right? I mean, this is all laser cut and powder coated, had that done by Send Cut Send, and I thoroughly enjoyed the process of building it. Is that economical? Is that the easiest or best way to get a belt grinder? Absolutely not, but I loved every minute of it. And I love using this thing, and I use it all the time for, deburring or rounding or squaring up corners. I love having this thing in the shop. In fact, I almost would think about not having a bench grinder if I have this. I do really, really like the VFD on this thing. These things are not cheap, but they're sealed and they just work really well. And yes, you have to pay extra money for the power switch, and yes, that's stupid, but to have something this simple where you just flip it on, turn the dial, hit the start button, and just go has been really great. I really enjoy having the simplicity of that. I think that's really great. Lots of people said that I would miss the tilt feature because I didn't build it into the first version of this grinder. I could always add it in by changing the legs out. But I wanted to wait and see if I really needed it or wanted it, and so far I haven't. What I mostly do is bring things up square and dress the edges. I've used this to dress edges for fabrication. When I cut something on the plasma cutter, just to square up and knock the dross off the edges, or go flat against this and go back and forth and knock the dross off the bottom of the part. That's 90% of what I do with this thing, and it's been great. I would definitely build it again, but if I just needed one and didn't want the project of building one, yeah, you could spend anywhere from $150 for a parts kit up through $2,000 for a fully complete parts kit, or you could spend $10,000 on a complete machine. You can spend anything that you want on these, but I probably would build one again just because I really enjoyed the experience of it. That of course brings us over here to the bench grinder, and this is not a nice bench grinder. This is a little Central Machinery. This came from Harbor Freight or Princess Auto if you're in Canada, and it's a 6-inch bench grinder. It's like, what do they claim this thing is? It's not much. It's like a 1/4 horsepower or maybe 1/3 of a horsepower. But if all you're going to do is grind lathe tool bits and all you have are small tools for a small lathe, this machine's been pretty adequate. You know, if I'm just grinding 1/4 inch tools or 5/16 inch tool blanks, it's worked fine for that. For grinding tungsten for a TIG welder, it's been fine. It does not have the power to plow through stuff. You know, I built this as one of the very first videos on the channel 6 years ago. I built these tool rests for it and this stabilizer bar. And, you know, I think I paid $25 for this thing, and it's just sat over here, and as much as I've used it, it's been fine. If you're gonna use it a lot, or if you're gonna put a Scotch-Brite wheel on it and use it for deburring, I'd probably go with an 8-inch grinder. I'd get something bigger, but for my use, this has been fine, and it was super, super cheap. Would I buy it again? Actually, I might not. I might just try to do everything with the belt grinder since I have it. But, you know, every once in a while, I don't use this much, but every once in a while you do need it. I'd probably go with an 8-inch if I bought one today, but if I were on a budget, this little 6-inch has worked just fine for me. And if we're going to talk about grinders, we need to talk about the Baldor buffer. This is this a 3/4 horsepower? Yeah, this is the 3/4 horsepower buffer. This is a pretty big one. This is the slow speed, the 1750 RPM, and I have it set up with a Scotch-Brite wheel, and I used that originally. I was thinking I was going to use that mostly for deburring sheet metal, which it works great for. And I've used it, anytime I need to clean up some kind of a part off of other tools. And right now I'm experimenting with an abrasive brush on here. This thing was pretty expensive. These things are like over $100. Sometimes some of them are $200. I haven't been that impressed with it. You can see the stack of Scotch-Brite buffing wheel, buffing pads that were on there before. I use those more, and again, especially if you're cleaning up sheet metal parts or you're cleaning up things that come off of the plasma cutter, this is a great combo. So this has largely replaced what most people would do with a bench grinder. Just quick deburring of parts, cleaning up edges on things. I love having this thing in the shop. Honestly, I haven't used it that much recently. And the reason is because I got the NSK grinder, and that's taken over most of the deburring duties. If you have space for one of these, it's great. I would not call it a necessity in the shop at all. This is a luxury item. And honestly, it's one that I've used less because I have the NSK and because I put buffing pads on a 2-inch die grinder for deburring things, for things that come off the plasma cutter, for sheet metal parts. I probably would go with the 2-inch right angle die grinder with pads on it for most deburring. You don't have to spend the money on a tool like this. I've enjoyed having it. It's not a necessity. I've already mentioned it a couple of times, but this is my NSK pencil grinder. This is the Evolution, and I use this for deburring. I picked this up, probably a little more than a year and a half ago. I don't even remember now. I'm sure you can go back and figure out when it started appearing in videos. But I use this primarily for deburring. So when a part comes off the mill and it's got a burr on it, I run this carbide burr down the edge, just one nice clean swipe, and it just takes it off nice and clean. You can even, with some skill, put nice 45-degree chamfers on things. I also use this for marking stock. When I have a piece of bar stock, and I cut the end off of it, so it's no longer marked, I'll actually put the marking in the end. Like if it's 1018 steel, I'll actually carve the numbers 1018 into the end of the bar. That way, no matter what happens to it, even if paint or marker or anything gets wiped off, if it gets oily, I can still tell exactly what the stock is. And this thing runs anywhere from, I think, 1,000 RPM up to 40,000 RPM. And I have just loved this little thing. It's nice and quiet. That's 30,000 RPM right there, and you can barely hear it. And it's just nice and smooth. It is a joy to use. This is another item in the shop that I would classify as a luxury item. If you do a lot of deburring or a lot of small work and you really could put this to use and use it quite a bit, it's worth every penny. If you've just got a little hobby shop and you're just trying to make ends meet and be able to do some things, this is absolutely not something that you should be going and spending money on. If you can afford it and if you can put it to use, it is a joy to have. Now, I personally would buy this again, and I use this. I've used this more than my bench grinder. I use this more than the belt grinder. I use this now more than the Baldor buffer, especially for deburring operations. But yeah, I would buy it again, but yes, it is definitely an extravagance. As I said, there are a lot of tools in here, and we are only about halfway through. We still haven't looked at any of the sheet metal tools, the plasma cutter, the electromagnetic bender. We haven't looked at the welders. We haven't looked at the Avid CNC router. And all of that stuff is going to be in part 2. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of this style of video. This is different from what I normally do. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Did the handheld camera make you sick? Let me know. And if you want to help support the channel directly, you can do that best on Patreon. Patrons get access to download files for all of my projects and a little look behind the scenes, and patrons voted on this video topic. You might want to weigh in on the next one. Thank you for watching.